Good morning, good afternoon, or good night, and welcome to Command Power, the show in which we discuss all things Magic the Gathering with a focus on Commander. And today we have a brand new deck for you, and just as a quick heads up, this is not a budget deck, although I do think it should be fairly easy to find substitutes for those expensive cards. But before that, just a quick reminder to please click like and subscribe if you enjoy my videos. We're well on our way to 1 million subscribers and every single click counts. And today's deck is going to be focused around Teysa, Envoy of Ghosts. For 5 colorless, 1 white and 1 black, she's a legendary creature human advisor 4/4 with vigilance, protection from creatures, and whenever a creature deals combat damage to you, destroy that creature. Create a 1/1 white and black spirit creature token with flying. So if you've never heard of Teysa, I don't blame you. She is much less popular than the other 2 Teysa cards, and there's an obvious reason for that, which is that she costs 7 mana, because her effects are actually very powerful. And if you watched my last video, you'll know how much I've been enjoying playing this deck lately and how well it's been doing. I've won a lot of games with this, and it just seems to come together really well, even though it's basically just a collection of random cards for the most part that don't have much synergy with the commander, because her abilities are very hard to build around. However, I wanted to talk a bit about Teysa herself. Despite her abilities not being very build around, she's very powerful if you can keep her in play. So what's tended to happen in most of the games is in the mid to late game, when everybody's kind of used up their resources, she just takes over the game. As long as she's out, you basically can't be attacked, and you're going to get to block their best creature for free every turn. Thanks to Teysa, she's also going to be clocking them for 4 commander damage a turn, and that's if you haven't buffed her power, which you'll see we have a couple of ways to do in this deck. One last thing I wanted to say is that we're going to actually do budget substitutions today. As I go through the list, I'm going to mention 5 or 6 cards that you can remove, which will drastically lower the price of this deck and get it to under $100, which I think is very reasonable. Anyway, without further ado, let's get started, and we're getting started with Academy Manufactor. As you're going to see in this deck, it's based around tokens and artifacts a lot, so this is going to actually help a lot with that. It's going to give us a lot of pieces that we can then put to good use. Bartolomé del Presidio is going to be a great way to use all of those treasure tokens and artifact tokens that we're going to be making. We can just threaten a lot of damage with this, and we have a few ways to make him unblockable. Blood Baron of Vizkopa is a card that hasn't seen much play for a long time, but it's still quite good in Commander. Targeted removal tends to be either white or black, and that means that this can often just swing through opposing boards without fear of getting removed whilst buffing your life total. It's a very decent card, particularly in certain metas. Devouring Sugarmore is a hilarious card that gives us 2 things to sacrifice with it, with the instant speed adventure, and then becomes a really huge beater that is hard to block and can clock our opponents very quickly. Divinity of Pride is another old school card that now only costs $1.63. This used to be one of the best cards in Commander, and is still very solid here. We have a lot of life gain, and this can very easily be an 8/8 flying lifelink for 5 mana, not to mention that the art is amazing. Fireman Commando has been performing very well so far. It's a great way for us to draw some cards, a nice little political card that can stop you being attacked as well. Gix Yawgmoth Praetor is another excellent way for us to draw cards, particularly since we have a few cards that are difficult to block, such as our commander herself. Golem Scheming Guide is a card I've been super impressed with, and it's very cheap right now. I think this fits in almost every black deck. Honestly, if your meta is fair, it's just a great card that's very difficult to deal with. Grim Hireling is incredible in this deck. We have a treasure sub-theme, so this is going to pull a lot of work, and actually being able to use those treasures as removal is even better. Karmic Guide is a classical card that I've mostly included just because I like the art, although it is very good with what the deck is trying to do, since we have big creatures that are often hit in the graveyard. Keen Duelist is my favorite card in the whole of Commander, and it's been hilarious with this deck since we often do end up taking a bunch of damage from it, but I still love it to death. Kothoped Soul Hoarder is another card that I really like. It allows us to draw so many cards, particularly since we're going to be removing a lot of our opponent's things. Lobelia Sackbill Vagans has been an absolute all-star so far. She's basically going to provide some graveyard hate while also ramping us and giving us a ton of treasures, which is particularly good if we have any treasure doubling effects. Lotho Corrupt Sheriff is amazing when you get it down early. You're going to be making a lot of treasures with this. You will lose a little bit of life, but those treasures are going to be invaluable, particularly with how many high impact expensive cards we have. Malevolent Witchkite comes into play, sacrifices a bunch of treasures, and draws us a ton of cards. This is incredibly powerful in this deck. Marionette Master is the best finisher in the deck. It's so easy to close out games with all of the treasures we're making in this. Mirkwood Bats is another alternative finisher, not quite as powerful as Marionette Master, but it can still do a lot of work, and the fact that it hits on the way in and on the way out is really good. Mondrak Glory Dominus is an incredibly powerful effect in the deck, and it's very easy to make it indestructible. If you do want to keep the deck under $100, I suggest changing it out for Discerning Financier. Obviously, it's nowhere near as powerful as a card, but it still puts quite a bit of work in the deck and can make you some nice treasure tokens. Obsidat Ghost Council is a card that I've loved since since the early days of Ravnica, it's very good in this deck. It's going to consistently pad our life total and make our opponents lose life, and then just swing in for a bunch of damage, whilst being quite difficult to kill and resisting all of our opponent's board wipes very well. Pitiless Plunderer is an amazing card that's fairly cheap at the moment, so it's a good time to pick it up. It just does so much work in this deck. Even though we don't have that many creatures dying, we're not an aristocrats deck after all, it's still going to make a ton of treasure tokens and be very solid. Pontiff of Blight is one of the ways we can close out the game. Apart from being very on theme with Teysa and the Orzhov, this is a great way to give all of our creatures extort, which then allows us to use all of those treasures to pay for those extort costs. So what could be more Orzhov than that? Ruthless Knave is a great way to get some more treasures, and we can use all of those treasures we've stockpiled and turn them into cards, which is very, very solid. Ruthless Technomancer is a card I love. It allows us to sacrifice one of our big creatures in order to get a lot of treasures. Obviously, it works very well with treasure doublers as well, and then we can kind of use those treasures to bring stuff back from the graveyard as long as this is alive. So this is a very interesting effect in the deck. Shakedown Heavy is a big, aggressive early creature that's going to either draw some cards or start clocking our opponents for a lot of damage. Skullport Merchant gives us an excellent way to turn our treasures into card advantage. Sun Titan is a classic of Commander, and it's going to provide a nice little bit of recursion in this deck, which sorely needs it. So Ginger the Meal Ender is incredible with all of the sacrificing of artifacts that we're going to be doing. Scrying away useless cards is great, and growing this into a veritable threat is also fantastic. Treasury Thrill is a slow card that can provide us with some graveyard recursion. I just felt that it was very on theme with the Orzhov thing we're going for, and also Extort is always great to have. Voracious Fellbeast is much better than it looks in this deck because we're getting a 6-for-1 most of the time, which is incredibly powerful. We can actually put those food tokens to good use, so this is great. And finally, Yahenni Undying Partisan gives us a nice way to survive board wipes whilst also being a free sack outlet. Moving on to sorceries, we've got Back for Second, and this card has been massively overperforming. I found it to be so good in this deck. Reanimating a 4-mana creature whilst getting another one back to your hand just feels really dirty when it works. Rite of Oblivion is a really useful card in the deck. We can just sacrifice any of our fodder, such as a food token, and remove one of our opponent's things, and then we get to just do it again. Fanatical Offering works really well by allowing us to sacrifice one of our artifacts to draw 2 cards and create a map token, which we can actually use. And moving on to artifacts, we have Blackblade Reforged. This is one of the ways you can kind of win games out of nowhere with this deck. Because Teysa is essentially unblockable, you can just dump this on her and give her +7/+7 or something, and then win the game in 2 attacks. And often your opponents are not going to be able to do much about that. I had a hilarious game recently where my opponent was on Henzi, and all of his removal was tied to creatures, so he basically could never remove Teysa. Collector's Vault plays a lot better than it looks in this deck. It's going to provide us with some card selection whilst also creating treasure tokens, which we can use later on. Idol of Oblivion is almost always turned on and allows us to draw some nice extra cards. Infernal Idol is a great mana rock in black decks. Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots can keep our commander safe, seeing as the main way she dies is through spot removal. The Iron Crag is better than it normally is in this deck because late game it's really good to have another +3/+3 equipment to throw onto Teysa, which makes her a 3-hit commander KO. Tithing Blade has actually done quite a bit of work in this deck. It's some acceptable removal that later in the game can be a really annoying way of keeping us alive and draining our opponents. And Vat of Rebirth is incredibly powerful with all of the artifact sacrifice we're going to be doing. This turns into a great way to reanimate stuff from our graveyard repeatedly. Moving on to enchantments, we have Anointed Procession. Now this is obviously one of the best cards in the deck, but it is also a $45 card, so if you wanted to substitute this for something else, again, there's not much that you can specifically substitute for, but what you can do is make the deck a little bit more aggressive, and in order to do that, you can include something like Tarian Soul Cleaver. If you equip this onto Teysa and then sacrifice a bunch of artifacts, you can KO someone out of nowhere. Next up, we have Black Market Connections. This has actually gone down quite a bit in price lately, so it still keeps us around the $100 budget that we're going for. It's very, very strong in this deck. We're getting a bunch of life, so the life doesn't hurt us that much, and the treasures really are the main attraction for us here. Blind Obedience is a great on-flavor Orzhov card that is going to make our opponents very annoyed and allow us to do a bit more of extorting. Duelist Heritage is a really fun political card that is actually incredibly good with Teysa because again, it allows Teysa to kill in just 3 hits and more if you have any equipment on her. Life Insurance is going to create a ton of treasures, which is absolutely fantastic in this deck, and coming with Extort makes it even better. Oath of the Grey Host gives us a lot of little game pieces that we can use. It's a pity that the tokens come in tapped with the last mode, but it's still very solid, and we like everything that this card is doing. Revel in Riches gives us an interesting alternate win condition and also provides some more treasure tokens. It's another of the cards you can remove if you're looking to take this deck in a budget direction, and you can include again something more aggressive such as Cranial Plating, which is going to work so well by giving Teysa a huge boost, and you can even move it around at instant speed. And Smothering Tide is obviously incredible in this deck that is so interested in making tokens. This card has gone down a bit in price, but it still puts us a little bit over our budget, so we're going to substitute it for Phyrexian Arena, which is just another way for us to draw some cards. And finally, for Planeswalkers, we have Kaya, Intangible Slayer, and this has overperformed every single game I've played it. Her -3 ability is completely insane, and if you have any token doublers out, it can absolutely win you the game. I had a game recently where I removed somebody's Warstorm Surge and then got 2 copies of it of my own, which of course ended the game in a hurry. The fact that she has Hexproof in your commander is so annoying to get through, means that she often ends up surviving quite a bit. Moving on to our lands, we have Bojuka Bog, which is a great way to deal with graveyards. High Market allows us to sacrifice stuff if we need to at instant speed. Phyrexian Tower is a card that's obviously removed from the budget list, but it's another way to sacrifice stuff at instant speed. It's not super important though, so don't worry if you don't have it. Tectonic Edge is a way for us to deal with our opponent's problem lands. Vault of the Archangel can give all of our creatures lifelink and death touch, which is always great. And War Room is a nice way for us to draw some extra cards since we're gaining so much life. So there you have it. That has been my Teysa Envoy of Ghosts deck tech. This is one I'm really proud of because I put it together basically from scratch, and it's just been working so well that I had to share it with you guys. What do you think about this one? Had you even heard of this commander before? Let me know in the comments section. I read all comments and respond to all of them too. And if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click like or subscribe. It really helps the channel. And until next time, take care.